Hey everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. I am here with my liquid courage once again, and today I thought that we would go through my Stephen King collection. One of my biggest reading regrets is that I didn't start reading Stephen King until much later in life. His books were always something I wanted to read when I was younger. My mom had a few of his hard copies in the bookshelf at home, but she thought that they were too scary for me when I was a kid. And then I moved to Chicago for school, where I went for a fiction writing degree. And fiction writing programs are not kind to genre writers. And so Stephen King got shit on constantly, where it was, he's quantity over quality. Who writes so many books? They can't all be good. And even writing genre fiction within the fiction writing program was very frowned upon. And so he just had this like gross stigma around him that I unfortunately bought into. And it wasn't until after college that I finally started diving in, finally started falling in love, and I met my husband, and he is also a major Stephen King fan. This is actually his shirt. And it's just continued on from there. I've almost always got one going in the background as I read other things. And our collection together over the last few years has already grown to be quite extensive. And then we actually inherited quite a few Stephen King books from my mother-in-law, and I will talk about that in a little bit, but that made our collection grow tenfold. So I thought it would be fun to dive into these boxes and dust some of these off of my shelf and look at them with you. So the first Stephen King book that I read at the perfect time. This is maybe 2013. It's Chicago. Everyone was calling it Chiberia because it was 40 degrees below zero. And I had nothing to do but read. I didn't have cable at that time. I had internet, but smartphones weren't what they are now. And so I finally dusted off The Shining, and this was the perfect book to read when I was snowed in with 40 below zero weather. And that is why I am drinking a martini tonight in homage to Mr. Jack Torrance. Of course, this is the classic Stephen King story of a writer who moves into this hotel in the mountains. He may or may not be becoming possessed while he is there, and he and his family are snowed in, but of course his son has The Shining, and lots of creepy shit is happening in here. Definitely recommend reading this one in the wintertime. This book also made me question what the hell I had been thinking for so long not reading Stephen King, because this is still top tier, one of my favorite books from him. And while we are on the subject of favorite Stephen King books, I also have The Stand. This is a chunk of a book. I think it's somewhere over 1,000 pages. Please do not let the length of this book scare you away. This is actually one of the few books in life that I have reread because I loved it so much. I read it about 7 years ago, kind of close to when my husband and I first started dating, and then I read it again during the pandemic because, of course. And this is the story about the collapse of society after a flu-like virus takes over the United States and possibly the world, but since everything's falling apart, nobody knows. This is definitely a classic story of good versus evil. A group of survivors are traveling to Hemingford Home, where they have dreams of this beautiful prairie in the middle of nowhere and this ancient woman, and the other group in the book is headed to Las Vegas, baby, where Randall Flagg is, trying to create an army of people to take over what is left of the world. Please, like I said, please do not let the length of this deter you. It is so action-packed. There's so many cool side stories happening in here. Lots of cool little, even just like newspaper headlines of the weird ways that people have died in the middle of this pandemic. It is just so awesome. The next one that I wanted to mention, I've already talked about 3 times in the now 3 videos on this channel. That is Misery. We also have Salem's Lot. This is, of course, King's ultimate vampire story about a small town and a pair of antique dealing vampires move to town. This book, I liked it. I wish that it was just slightly scarier. It's a little bit slow in some parts, but definitely one of the top vampire stories out there. I mentioned this out of order. This is the first one. I believe there are 7, but this is the Stand graphic novel series, and so if the length of the Stand scares you a little bit, the graphic novel series is also really awesome. We have The Body. Most people know this from the movie Stand By Me. Kicking it all the way back to the very beginning is Carrie. I think I am one of the few people who actually really enjoyed Carrie. Story of a telekinetic teenage girl at school. She gets her period. She has a crazy religious mother, and she is ruthlessly tormented by the popular girls at her school. I would say of all of the King books I've read, somehow him writing about a teenage girl getting her period is one of the least cringe ways that he's written women. That's a whole other video, but I liked Carrie. We have On Writing by Stephen King. This is his memoir of writing. This is one of my favorite books on the craft of writing, period. It is super attainable, super relatable, and this is one that I think I'll be revisiting soon as I try to dive back into writing. We have Joyland. This is one of his noir stories. I don't remember much about it, but I do remember that I liked it. This takes place at a carnival. The college student takes a job at a fair of sorts, and there is a mystery to uncover, possible haunting. Like I said, I don't remember much about this, but I do remember liking it. Road Rage. This is by Joe Hill, his son, Stephen King, and Richard Matheson. I don't know anything about this, but I will say that every time my husband and I see a creepy semi-truck, you all know what the creepy semi-truck looks like. We call it a Stephen King character, and I'm sure it stems from this somehow. Desperation. I am looking forward to reading this someday. I read the first chapter, very intense, need to get back into it, but we've got the classic Stephen headshot. The Institute. This is one of his more recent releases. This is definitely, if you like Stranger Things, you will love The Institute. And this is about an institute where children are kidnapped out of their beds. They are sent to this institute, and there are experiments done on them, and they do a lot of mind control exercises and things like that to harness the capabilities of these children. This was just okay to me. I think Stranger Things did it better, but it was still a fun read. 11/22/63. This is a favorite. I can't believe I used to tote this thing around to work on my commute every day. This is the story about a diner that has a time travel portal straight to 1963, and the owner of the diner has been trying for years to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy, to see what happens, and this patron of his diner sort of takes over the game. I have very limited brain space for time travel. It is just something that never makes sense to me. But the way that he writes it in the story, it makes sense. It is great. I loved the time period. I loved the mission. And I will say this book has one of the worst lines of dialogue I have ever read. But despite that, this is still great. This is one of my favorite thrift store finds. This is the Bachman Books, of course, Stephen King writing under his pseudonym. This book is no longer in print anymore. It does have Road Work, The Running Man, The Long Walk, but it also has Rage, which is something that Stephen King wanted pulled out of publication because it deals with this school shooting. But this is very tough to find since it is out of print, but we actually found it in a used bookstore in Milwaukee for $3.95. I'm pretty sure this is worth more than that, but we got it for $3.95. From our personal collection, you might notice that It is missing. We unfortunately have that on ebook. It is everything you've heard and more. There's a lot going on in that book, including that scene we've all heard about. Still a fantastic story. On audiobook, I recently listened to Billy Summers, which is a story about a hitman who takes his last job, and of course shit goes wrong, and the last job never goes as easily as they want it to. I thought that one was really thrilling. Definitely goes back to those like cringe interpretations of women that I mentioned before. The next part of our collection we actually got from my mother-in-law, Linda. In my last video, I mentioned that January was like a sad, stressful, wild month for us, and the biggest thing that happened in January was that we lost my mother-in-law. I think anyone that knew her would tell you that she was just a badass. I really hit the lottery in the mother-in-law department. Her and I got along so well. She was so funny. She loved animals. She knew plants. She had like the craziest green thumb of all time. She also loved to read. And one of the coolest things over the last few years, discovering Stephen King and reading more of his books, has been talking to her about them as well. She's a huge book collector, and even in the last few years when she wasn't reading as much, she still bought all of his books the day they came out. Like, she was a constant reader. As we know, that's what Stephen King calls his dedicated fans. Shortly before she passed, we moved her closer to us in the city, so we got to spend tons of time with her, and the one thing that she absolutely wanted us to have was her book collection. A lot of these books I don't know shit about. I think it's worth mentioning that some of these might be out of order, especially as we get into the Dark Tower series, and there are just so many books in his collection that it's impossible to know them all. So I might not have much to say about all of them, but I still thought it would be fun to go through all of them. Rose Madder, Insomnia. Also, this has one of the best Stephen King author photos ever. Hearts in Atlantis. Dreamcatcher. This is one of his books that I am so excited to read someday. This is definitely a book that emerged in the Stephen King cocaine era. If you've seen the movie starring Jason Lee, we know that this is about aliens and butts, and it is bad. If you listen to podcasts, How Did This Get Made did an episode of the Dreamcatcher movie. It was fantastic. This is actually one of the hardcovers that my mom had while I was growing up. And when she said that they were probably too scary for me, she was probably just protecting me from reading this. I personally can't wait. I know it's not going to be great, but it will still be fun. Lacey's Story. I had to change my shirt because apparently drinking martinis while looking at books in bed is not a good combination. Cell. Also, fantastic author photo. Full dark, no stars. Under the Dome. This is another chonker. This is one of those ones that I think I'll get to eventually, but maybe not anytime soon. Desperation, but in hardback. The Bazaar of Bad Dreams from a Buick 8. This looks like one that I probably might not ever read, but I will never say never. The Green Mile. Of course, this is a famous movie. I will definitely probably read this, probably sooner than later. Danse Macabre. This is kind of like his examination of the horror genre in general, I believe. So I am very excited to read this. We've got another stunning author photo. He is really the king of author photo. The Eyes of the Dragon. This I have actually never heard of before in my life. Thinner by Richard Bachman. Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Very old, missing its dust jacket. The Drawing of the Three. I think this is a Dark Tower novel. Wizard and Glass, also a Dark Tower novel, as well as The Wastelands. Blaze by Richard Bachman. Black House, written with Peter Straub. The Gunslinger, also as part of the Dark Tower series. The Colorado Kid. Bag of Bones. Sleeping Beauties, written with his son Owen King. The Talisman, also written with Peter Straub. The Regulations by Richard Bachman. And then there's also this really cool pop-up novel of the girl who loved Tom Gordon. So cool. I have never read it before, and so I'm excited to read the novel, but then also experience this really cool pop-up novel. 4 Past Midnight. This last box of books actually has a few like really old ones that I am very excited to read and are kind of at the top of my TBR list as far as Stephen King books are concerned. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, Missing Its Dust Jacket. Christine. This is maybe one of the only car books you'll ever find me reading. I have seen the movie. It is gloriously bad good, so I will probably read this eventually. Stephen King and a Friend. The Dead Zone, another older version of Carrie. Firestarter. Cycle of the Werewolf. This cover is so cool. It looks like we do have a copy now of it. Everything's Eventual, another one I have actually never heard of. The Tommyknockers. Pet Cemetery. After I finish reading Misery, this will probably be my next Stephen King novel. My mother-in-law always said that she kind of regretted reading this when she did because she read it right after the birth of my brother-in-law, and so I've kind of been putting some distance between having a new baby and reading Pet Cemetery, in which I know there is child loss. I'm really looking forward to reading this. I know a lot of people really love it. Cujo, classic story of the dog gone bad. Needful Things, devil-like figure running a antique store in a small town. The movie is just delightful, so if you haven't seen it, watch that. I will probably be reading this in the near future as well because I did really enjoy watching the movie. The Dark Half, Dolores Claiborne. Actually just finished listening to this on audiobook a couple of months ago. Highly recommend listening to it on audiobook if you are able to. The narrator does the most fantastic job. It is like listening to a one-woman play as she gets into the character of Dolores Claiborne. She is a woman whose employer mysteriously dies, and people are looking at her a little bit funny because her husband also died under mysterious circumstances. And so this whole book reads like it's her confession of what happened with her husband, what happened with her employer, and it's definitely one of my new favorite King stories for sure. And last but not least, we have Gerald's Game. Now that I'm thinking about it, I know that we also have Dr. Sleep, That one is also fantastic. We did recently drop a book behind our bookshelves, and I think that might be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this hasn't been too long. It has been so nice to see all of the books that we get to have from my mother-in-law. I know, of course, I would rather have her back than have books like literally any day. She was just such a special person, but it makes me so happy thinking of my son Wolf in the future, picking up these books and having that be a way that he gets to connect with her later on, since he won't have any of those like tangible memories with her. He will at least know that these books belong to her. He'll get to have that little connection with her then. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos. I think that I'm going to start posting on like a weekly basis, maybe Fridays. I haven't figured it out yet, but as I am new, I just wanted to ride this momentum and keep posting as many videos as I can. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and leave a comment down below if you have a favorite Stephen King book. I would love to hear what I should prioritize next. Cheers!